Welcome back to Coremates. If this is your first time here, this is a space where we sit down together, not as experts standing on a stage, but as women thinking out loud, reflecting honestly, and trying to understand ourselves a little better. Coremates has always been about exploring the inner world in a way that feels human, grounded, and unfiltered, and today's conversation feels especially close to that intention. We're talking about something that lives inside us every single second of our lives, the relationship between our mind and our body. Not in a dramatic, spiritualized way, but in a very everyday, lived way. The way your thoughts affect your breathing without you noticing. The way your posture shifts when you feel insecure. The way exhaustion creeps in even when you think you're handling everything. And I want to start with something personal. Recently, I noticed I was mentally overwhelmed. My thoughts were moving fast. I was juggling responsibilities, replaying conversations, planning ahead, worrying about things that hadn't even happened yet, and yet my body kept moving as if nothing was wrong. I was still answering messages, showing up to meetings, cooking, cleaning, smiling at people, doing all the visible things that make life look fine. But underneath that surface, something was misaligned. I wasn't breathing deeply. My shoulders were tense for hours. My jaw was tight. And only when my body finally slowed me down, through pure exhaustion, did I realize how out of sync I had become. It made me question something deeper. How often do we live almost entirely in our heads, while our bodies quietly carry the weight of everything we refuse to pause and feel? I'm really glad we're talking about this today, because I think this is something so many of us experience but rarely name. We live in a culture that constantly stimulates the mind. Information, notifications, decisions, productivity, comparison. And we become so used to operating mentally that we forget the body is part of the equation. We push the mind hard, planning, analyzing, overthinking, optimizing our future selves. And then, sometimes, we push the body just as hard. Workouts, errands, multitasking, staying busy so we don't have to slow down. But rarely do we ask whether the two are actually working together. And when they're not aligned, we feel it, even if we don't understand it. We feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. We feel anxious without a clear reason. We feel physically restless, but mentally foggy. Or we feel mentally sharp but physically drained. It's like living in two separate systems that stopped communicating but are still expected to function as one. And what's fascinating is that we often treat mind and body as if they're separate lanes we can switch between, like today I'll focus on my mental health, tomorrow I'll focus on my physical health. But that division isn't real. It's conceptual. In reality, every thought has a physical echo, and every physical state shapes our thinking. Exactly. And that's really the heart of today's episode. Today, we want to explore why mind and body aren't separate lanes we drive on, they're the same road. They are constantly informing each other, responding to each other, influencing each other in ways that are both subtle and profound. When I'm anxious, my breathing shortens, my heart rate changes, my digestion shifts. When I don't move my body for days, my mood dips, my focus weakens, my patience shrinks. These aren't coincidences. They're signals of a system that is deeply interconnected. And what's important about this conversation is that it's not just poetic language. Science is actually showing us that the brain networks responsible for thinking are physically connected to the networks responsible for movement and internal regulation. So when we talk about balance, we're not talking about a vague ideal. We're talking about biology. But we're also talking about something deeply human. Because disconnection doesn't just show up in lab results. It shows up in burnout. In chronic tension, in emotional overwhelm, in feeling like you're constantly doing, but never really inhabiting your own life. And I think that's why this matters right now. We are living in a time where mental load is heavier than ever. We consume more information in a day than previous generations did in weeks. We are constantly evaluating ourselves, comparing ourselves, trying to improve ourselves. The mind rarely gets silence. And the body rarely gets presence. Even when we exercise, we're often distracted. Even when we rest, we're scrolling. Even when we sit still, our thoughts are racing. So today isn't about telling anyone to become perfectly balanced or suddenly start meditating for an hour a day. It's about awareness. It's about recognizing that if we continue to live primarily in one dimension, either mental or physical, something inside us eventually starts to protest. And maybe the real invitation today is simple. What would it look like to use your mind and your body daily at the same level? Not perfectly, not rigidly, but consciously. Because when those two parts of us start working together instead of compensating for each other, life feels different. More stable, more grounded, more real. Before we go any deeper, I think it's important to really ground this conversation in something tangible, because sometimes when we talk about mind and body being connected, people might think we're speaking metaphorically, like a vague idea to relax more or listen to your feelings. But there's real, hard science that shows these systems are literally intertwined. The parts of our brain that control movement, the motor cortex, are physically connected to areas that manage thought, planning, emotions, and even the regulation of heartbeat and digestion. That means your brain isn't just sending instructions to the body like a remote control, it's in constant, two-way conversation with it. Every thought, every worry, every mental replay of the past or projection of the future triggers responses in the body, and every physical tension, shallow breath, or posture shift sends signals back to the brain, subtly shaping what you feel and think. It's almost like the mind and body are speaking in two languages, translating constantly for each other, and the more you ignore one side, the louder the other side speaks. And I think this explains so much about why we feel off sometimes, even when everything externally looks fine. Exactly. And what really fascinates me is how modern neuroscience is validating what people have felt intuitively for centuries, even across different cultures. Traditional systems like Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine never treated mind and body as separate entities. They saw them as a unified system where imbalance in one manifests as imbalance in the other. Now, research shows that chronic mental stress, for example, doesn't just make us feel anxious. It triggers biochemical changes, cortisol release, inflammatory responses, and changes in heart rate and immune function. So stress isn't just a mental experience. It's a full-body phenomenon that literally changes our internal physiology. And what's even more amazing is that the same research shows that physical practices, stretching, mindful movement, breath work, can send feedback to the brain that calms these stress responses. So it's a two-way street. The brain shapes the body shapes the brain, and understanding this gives us real agency over how we live day to day. Yes. And the everyday examples are so striking because most of us experience them all the time without realizing it. I notice it in my own life when I get anxious about something trivial, like a late email or a sudden change in schedule. Suddenly my stomach feels tense, my shoulders rise, my jaw clenches, and my breathing becomes shallow. Even though there's no immediate physical danger, my body responds as if there is. Conversely, when I make a small shift, like intentionally stretching, walking slowly, or just noticing my posture, I feel a change in my mental state almost immediately. Thoughts feel less jumbled. Stress feels lighter. Perspective returns. That constant, subtle feedback loop is what makes the mind-body connection not just theoretical, but incredibly practical. And I love thinking about it like this. When we learn to notice these signals early, we can intervene before tension escalates, before mental chatter becomes exhaustion, and before emotional overwhelm takes over our day. Exactly, and that's why I think it's also so interesting that neuroscience has begun to identify specific pathways for this communication. The vagus nerve, for instance, is like a superhighway connecting the brain to the heart, lungs, and digestive system. When we practice deep breathing or gentle movement, we're essentially sending signals along this highway telling the brain, it's safe, you can relax now. And over time, this strengthens the brain's ability to regulate stress responses more efficiently. It's neuroplasticity in action. Repeated mind-body engagement rewires the brain to be more integrated and flexible. And the best part is, this doesn't require extreme routines or complicated techniques. Simple, consistent awareness of the body, noticing posture, breath, or subtle tension, can create profound shifts. It's like we've had this tool inside us all along, and science is finally showing us how to use it effectively. Yes, and I think this is why awareness matters so much. Many of us are moving through our days on autopilot, mentally busy, physically disconnected. But the moment you pay attention, even briefly, you start to notice how much your thoughts affect your body and how much your body affects your thoughts. That's why practices like yoga, Tai Chi, or even mindful walking are so effective. They engage both systems simultaneously, teaching the brain and body to respond to each other instead of working at odds. Brain imaging studies show that after consistent practice, connections between attention centers and bodily awareness centers strengthen, making us more attuned to internal cues. This means we can sense stress before it escalates, adjust our behavior before tension becomes pain, and respond to our emotional states before they overwhelm us. It's not about perfect control, it's about listening and responding, like having a conversation with yourself in real time. And when I think about it personally, that's what makes this so empowering. I notice when I ignore my body, my brain starts to feel foggy, my emotions feel heavier, and even simple tasks take more energy. But when I tune into both, even for a few minutes in the morning or evening, my thoughts feel clearer, my mood steadies, and my energy feels aligned. It's not about doing more, it's about doing differently, about noticing, engaging, and allowing mind and body to work together instead of separately. And that's the message I hope listeners take away. This integration isn't complicated or mystical. It's biology, it's intuition, and it's daily practice all rolled into one. And the more we honor that, the more we notice subtle changes in how we feel, think, and move through life. Exactly. And that awareness is the first step toward meaningful balance. Science shows the pathways, tradition has shown us the wisdom, and our own experience confirms it every day, from the tension in our shoulders to the clarity after a walk, to the difference in mood when we breathe deeply before responding to stress. And the more we learn to notice, the more agency we gain over our own well-being. It's not about perfection or rigid routines. It's about curiosity, listening, and small, consistent adjustments that allow mind and body to communicate more clearly. And I love that this is something anyone can start doing immediately. No fancy equipment, no strict schedules, just gentle awareness and a willingness to respond to what your body and mind are telling you. So, Elen, when we talk about the mind-body connection, I can feel it in my own life, but I'm curious, what's actually happening in the brain when this connection strengthens? Because it feels like more than just noticing tension or relaxing, like there's an actual shift happening internally. Studies using imaging like fMRI are showing that when we engage in practices that combine movement with focused awareness, yoga, Tai Chi, or even mindful breathing, the brain doesn't just experience a fleeting sense of calm. It actually changes its activation patterns. Areas responsible for attention, emotion regulation, and bodily awareness start communicating more efficiently, creating what researchers call neural integration. That means the parts of the brain that help you focus your mind are now more connected with the parts that sense your body's internal state. So you're not just thinking about how tense your shoulders are, you're literally sensing and responding to it in real time. And over time, this repeated practice strengthens these connections, making the brain better at noticing subtle cues, regulating stress responses, and maintaining clarity even when external life gets hectic. It's fascinating because it confirms something I've always felt intuitively, that when I move with attention, I actually feel mentally sharper, more present, and more emotionally balanced. But now we know the biology is real. It's not just metaphor, it's pathways, signals, and structural adaptation. Yes, and I think what's so incredible about this research is that it reveals how plastic and responsive the brain actually is, which gives all of us a kind of agency we might not have realized we had. When we engage in these practices, it's like we're training our brain to pay attention not just to the mind, but to the body simultaneously, creating a feedback loop that strengthens self-awareness and emotional resilience. Neuroimaging studies show that repeated engagement in mindful movement enhances connectivity between the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for higher-order thinking and decision-making, and the insula, which is central to interoception, our ability to sense what's happening inside our body. This alignment allows us to respond rather than react, because we're aware of subtle cues that previously went unnoticed, tight shoulders signaling stress, shallow breathing signaling anxiety, or even fatigue signaling overexertion. Over time, these stronger connections make it easier to regulate emotions, maintain attention, and feel grounded in the present moment. And it's so profound to realize that something as simple as moving with awareness or focusing on the breath isn't just a wellness trick. It's literally changing the architecture of our brain to support integrated living. I love that it turns everyday awareness into a tool for building long-term neural resilience. It's almost like we have this invisible scaffolding inside us that grows stronger every time we pay attention to both mind and body. Exactly, and it reframes the way we think about balance, because it's not something external we need to schedule or force. It's a dynamic, living process happening inside us every time we engage intentionally. When we're mindful of our posture, our breath, our movements, the brain networks that previously operated separately begin to synchronize, which improves not only how we process emotions, but also how we approach problem-solving, creativity, and focus. It's almost like the mind and body begin to speak the same language in a way that feels effortless once the practice is embedded in daily life. And what strikes me is how small practices can create cumulative effects. A 5-minute mindful stretch, a slow walk, even a few conscious deep breaths can initiate these neural changes over time. That means the barrier to starting is surprisingly low, but the payoff is significant. Greater mental clarity, emotional stability, and a sense of being fully present in your own life. And thinking about it this way makes me feel empowered, because balance isn't a mythical state we have to chase. It's something we cultivate through repeated, intentional engagement with both mind and body. It's like tending to a garden where every small, mindful action nourishes the connection between thought and sensation. Yes, and this also helps explain why so many people feel frustrated when they try to separate mental exercises from physical movement, or vice versa. If you focus purely on cognitive tasks without tuning into the body, or only push physical activity without mindful awareness, the brain doesn't integrate those experiences as effectively. Integration requires simultaneous engagement, noticing the heartbeat while stretching, observing thought patterns while walking, or bringing awareness to breathing while completing simple movements. Over time, this repeated integration strengthens the pathways that allow the mind to process stress and the body to respond adaptively, creating a kind of resilience that carries over into daily life. And I think what's beautiful is that this aligns both with the wisdom of ancient practices, which always emphasized awareness in motion, and with modern neuroscience, which now provides evidence for exactly why those practices work. It's a gentle reminder that the tools for balance aren't somewhere outside us. They're built into our nervous system, waiting to be engaged with curiosity and attention. And that awareness, I think, is the first step toward reclaiming a sense of harmony in how we move through the world. Yes, exactly. And it makes me think about the subtle signals we often ignore: the shallow breath after a long meeting, the tight shoulders at the end of a stressful day, the tension in the jaw while we're thinking through a problem. Those aren't just annoyances, they're the body sending messages to the brain, and when we notice them, we actually activate these neural pathways that help regulate stress and improve cognitive function. So even when it feels minor or insignificant, engaging with the body in these moments is a kind of brain training, building awareness, enhancing attention networks, and supporting emotional regulation. And what's encouraging is that this can be done in daily life without special equipment or schedules, just noticing, feeling, and gently responding to what arises. It's like the brain and body are learning to collaborate, and the more we practice, the stronger that collaboration becomes. That's why I love framing this as an invitation rather than a prescription. It's an exploration, a daily conversation between mind and body that anyone can begin, no matter where they are. Absolutely. And the more I reflect on it, the more I realize that cultivating this integrated awareness also changes our perception of ourselves and our environment. When mind and body are aligned, we notice subtler shifts in emotion, we respond more thoughtfully to challenges, and we become more attuned to the rhythms of daily life that previously passed unnoticed. This kind of neural integration fosters not just emotional regulation, but also creativity, patience, and even a deeper sense of presence and fulfillment. And I think that's the real takeaway. These aren't abstract benefits. They're tangible shifts in how we navigate life, how we relate to others, and how we feel within ourselves. Every mindful breath, every intentional movement, every moment of noticing reinforces the pathways that make this connection more natural, more responsive, and more enduring. And the beauty is that this process is ongoing. Every day provides opportunities to strengthen the dialogue between mind and body in small, manageable, and profoundly impactful ways. You know, thinking about this, I realize I've had so many moments when I completely ignored my body's signals. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, a subtle tension in my jaw, and convinced myself that I could push through because my mind was in control. And I remember one period in particular where I was juggling deadlines, constant planning, and emotional labor with friends and family, but I didn't pause to notice that my body was carrying all that stress. By the end of the week, I felt completely drained, but not just physically, emotionally exhausted, mentally foggy, and almost incapable of responding to anything without irritation or frustration. It's like my mind was sprinting, while my body was silently screaming for attention, and the more I ignored it, the louder the distress became. And looking back, I can see now that the cortisol levels in my body were probably elevated the entire week, triggering inflammation and subtly affecting my sleep and immune response without me even realizing it. I didn't just feel tired, I felt off, scattered, disconnected, and powerless in a way that could have been mitigated if I had engaged with both mind and body together. That moment taught me that disconnection isn't abstract or harmless. It's an active biological stressor that slowly compounds until the system forces you to notice. And that's what makes understanding the mind-body link so urgent, because ignoring it has consequences that extend far beyond what we feel in the moment. Absolutely, and I can relate from the opposite side of the coin. There were times when I thought pushing my physical body would somehow resolve mental tension, like I could outrun stress through exercise or distraction. I would overcommit to running, cycling, or back-to-back gym sessions, assuming that the mental pressure would ease if my body was exhausted. But what ended up happening was almost paradoxical. My body became stronger, but my mental fatigue intensified because I hadn't paused to check in with how I was actually feeling emotionally. My thoughts became foggier, my patience thinner, and I started experiencing small panic moments that surprised me because I thought I was taking care of myself. And the science really backs this up. When we exercise without integrating awareness or recovery, cortisol levels can remain elevated longer, inflammation doesn't reduce, and chronic imbalance can subtly disrupt sleep, immunity, and even metabolism. It's a feedback loop. Pushing the body without listening to the mind only creates more stress signals, which the brain interprets as ongoing threat, further amplifying mental strain. I think this is why disconnection is so sneaky. It often feels like productivity or action, but it's quietly taxing both systems. And the lesson I've learned is that balance isn't just doing both mind and body work. It's about engaging them together, so one system doesn't end up compensating for the other in a way that eventually backfires. Yes, and it makes me reflect on how subtle these feedback loops can be. They don't always hit you all at once. Sometimes it's just a tension headache, a restless night, or irritability that seems disproportionate to what's happening externally. Other times, it's emotional exhaustion, anxiety, or a sense of disconnection from yourself and others. And if this pattern continues for weeks or months, your nervous system essentially recalibrates to expect imbalance, which can make stress feel like the default state. You're no longer just feeling out of sync. Your body and brain have adapted to disconnection as a baseline, and it becomes increasingly difficult to restore harmony without intentional, consistent engagement. That's why I find it so empowering when we realize that even small acts of noticing, breathing, stretching, pausing to feel tension, can begin to reverse these patterns. It's not about perfection or overhauling your entire life. It's about consciously interrupting disconnection before it becomes entrenched. And this insight really reframes self-care for me. It's not indulgence, it's essential maintenance for a system designed to operate as one integrated whole. Exactly. And it also helps explain why some days feel so much heavier than others, even if on paper nothing has changed. Disconnection accumulates in layers. Unaddressed tension in the body, unresolved thought patterns, skipped pauses, constant mental stimulation, and over time the body signals get louder, sometimes in ways we can't ignore, like chronic pain, fatigue, or sleep disruption. And what's fascinating is that when we bring awareness back into the system, even subtly, it begins to recalibrate both mental and physical responses. You notice that your breath slows naturally, your thoughts clear a little, and your body feels lighter, as if it has been waiting all along for you to finally listen. This is the science of feedback loops in action. When one system compensates without support from the other, stress compounds. When the two are reconnected, resilience grows. And I love that this insight gives us such a practical takeaway. You don't need extreme routines or massive life changes, just conscious, repeated attention to both mind and body, because small interventions create ripples that strengthen the entire system. It's both humbling and liberating to realize how much influence we actually have over our own internal balance. Yes, and I think it also shows that disconnection is more common than we might think. Everyone experiences stress, tension, or fatigue at some point, but chronic imbalance often goes unnoticed because it feels normal. We live in a culture that praises constant productivity, multitasking, and mental output, while physical awareness and emotional check-ins are often neglected. And over time, that neglect quietly shapes our biology. Stress hormones like cortisol rise, inflammation persists, sleep quality diminishes, and even metabolism can shift, creating a cascade of effects that influence energy, focus, and mood. So when we say mind and body are connected, we're not just speaking metaphorically, we're describing a real, measurable system that responds to neglect as much as it responds to attention. And the beauty is, when we start engaging both systems intentionally, even in small, consistent ways, we reverse those patterns, restore alignment, and build resilience that compounds over time. This makes disconnection not something to fear, but a signal. An opportunity to notice, respond, and begin restoring balance in a way that transforms daily life. Exactly, and I love framing it like that, as an invitation rather than a problem. Disconnection isn't a moral failing, it's a natural consequence of living in an environment and culture that overloads the mind and underengages the body. But the science shows that every small act of reconnection, noticing posture, deep breathing, pausing to observe your thoughts, gentle movement, has measurable benefits for brain and body communication, emotional regulation, and overall well-being. And perhaps the most empowering part is realizing that these adjustments are accessible to everyone. No special equipment, no complex routines, just curiosity, attention, and willingness to listen to what your system is telling you. It's a practice of presence that strengthens the feedback loop in the right direction, creating a positive cycle where mind and body support each other rather than compensate for each other. And that, I think, is the essence of true integration, the ability to live fully aware, present, and aligned, one small mindful action at a time. I think one of the moments that really made me realize the power of mind-body connection happened not in a fancy class or a guided meditation, but in something incredibly simple, my morning walk before work. I started deliberately slowing down my steps, noticing each movement of my feet and legs, tuning into the rhythm of my breath, and allowing my mind to wander without judgment instead of jumping immediately into my mental to-do list. And something remarkable happened over time. My mood shifted almost immediately, but more than that, my productivity at work improved in ways I hadn't expected. By the time I reached my office, I felt more centered, less reactive, and more able to engage with challenges without being swept into mental chaos. The tension I often carried in my shoulders and jaw seemed lighter, my thinking clearer, and even small tasks that usually felt tedious became easier to approach. It was almost as if my nervous system had recalibrated itself, preparing me for the day with a kind of gentle resilience that I had never cultivated before. And this simple, consistent practice reminded me that you don't need hours of self-care routines or complicated rituals, just intentional engagement of mind and body, even for 15 minutes, can ripple through your entire day in a profound way. That resonates so much with me because I've had moments where my body spoke truths my mind refused to acknowledge, And only when I slowed down enough to listen did I realize what was really happening. I remember one evening, after weeks of pushing through deadlines, workouts, and obligations, I noticed my shoulders were painfully tight, my breath shallow, and my jaw clenched in a way that I had completely ignored while I was getting things done. And instead of brushing it off, I decided to sit quietly, placing my hands on my chest, focusing on my breath, and allowing myself to feel the tension instead of resisting it. And as I did, I realized that I had been denying a deep emotional exhaustion, feelings of anxiety and overwhelm I had been suppressing because I thought I could just move faster and keep going. That practice of noticing and breathing slowly didn't just ease the physical tension, it illuminated what my mind had been avoiding, and I could finally respond to my stress with gentleness instead of pushing against it. Over the next few days, I integrated short breathwork sessions, pauses in movement, and conscious stretches into my routine, and I noticed a dramatic shift. My focus improved, my emotional reaction softened, and I felt far more aligned and present in my own life. It taught me that listening to the body isn't indulgent or optional. It's a doorway to understanding the mind in ways words alone can't capture, and it has the power to transform not just how we feel, but how we live. And I love that both of our stories show how accessible this kind of awareness is. It doesn't require special skills, equipment, or hours of practice. It's about creating moments of pause and curiosity where you let the body speak and you respond. When we allow ourselves to notice tension, breath, or subtle discomfort, we're not just alleviating symptoms, we're engaging neural pathways that strengthen the connection between thought and sensation, attention and awareness, mind and body. And what's even more beautiful is that these small practices often snowball into bigger changes. After just a few weeks of my morning walks, I found myself naturally more present in conversations, less reactive in stressful situations, and more patient with myself and others. It made me realize that integration doesn't need to be dramatic. It's the accumulation of small, deliberate actions that create profound shifts. And in a world that often pushes us to compartmentalize our mental and physical experiences, these practices serve as gentle reminders that the two are deeply intertwined, always talking and waiting for us to engage with them consciously. That's why I love sharing these stories, so listeners can see themselves in them and perhaps feel inspired to try even one small practice that bridges mind and body in their own lives. Exactly. And I think there's something deeply human about noticing these moments because they resonate with our intuition as much as our biology. The tension in the shoulders, the shallow breath, or the restless energy we sometimes feel, those are messages, not inconveniences. When I took the time to honor those signals through mindful breathing and gentle movement, I noticed not only physical relief, but a kind of emotional clarity and mental spaciousness that had been elusive before. It's like creating a dialogue with yourself that allows insight to surface naturally, instead of forcing understanding through sheer willpower. And over time, those small, consistent practices of noticing, pausing, and responding begin to create a rhythm, a baseline of awareness where mind and body communicate fluidly rather than being in conflict. That rhythm, I think, is what many people are searching for without realizing it, a sense of alignment that permeates daily life in subtle but profound ways. And the beauty is that every listener can start with just one small moment, a breath, a walk, or even noticing their posture, and gradually expand it into a richer, more integrated practice. It's both liberating and deeply empowering to recognize that the tools for balance have always been within us, waiting for our attention. As we move into practical takeaways, I want to really emphasize that mind-body integration isn't just philosophical. It's rooted in concrete neuroscience and small, intentional practices can actively rewire the brain and nervous system in ways that influence how we feel, think, and respond every day. One of the most effective approaches is breath-centered movement, which is simply coordinating the inhale and exhale with deliberate motion while paying attention to bodily sensations. Research using fMRI and other imaging shows that these practices don't just calm the mind temporarily, they increase connectivity between neural networks involved in attention, bodily awareness, and emotional regulation, meaning that every time we combine breath with movement, We're literally training our brain to notice, integrate, and respond to signals from the body more efficiently. And the beauty is, these practices are flexible. They can be adapted to a morning stretch, a short walk, or even subtle movements while seated at your desk, making it accessible for nearly everyone. When we engage in mindful walking, for example, focusing on the sensation of each footfall, the rhythm of our breath, and subtle shifts in posture, we're simultaneously activating attention networks in the prefrontal cortex and interoception circuits in the insula, creating a dialogue between mind and body that strengthens self-regulation. Over time, this repeated integration makes our responses to stress more adaptive, improves emotional clarity, and even supports physical health by regulating cortisol and inflammation. And what's truly empowering is that these small, intentional practices don't require perfection or long hours. Even a few minutes daily create measurable, cumulative benefits that ripple through the entire nervous system. Yes, and to build on that, it's also important to highlight why this works biologically, because the nervous system is designed to learn from these repeated experiences. Every time you pause, notice your breath, or consciously stretch, sensory feedback travels from the body to the brain, influencing areas responsible for emotional regulation, attention, and executive function. This isn't just a feeling of calm, it's actual rewiring, where the brain strengthens pathways that link physical state with cognitive and emotional processes. And it's fascinating how even small shifts, like rolling your shoulders while taking a deep breath, noticing tension in your jaw, or lengthening your spine, can trigger the parasympathetic nervous system, slow heart rate, reduce stress hormone levels, and improve focus almost immediately. Simple grounding exercises like placing your hand on your chest and one on your belly, feeling the rise and fall with each breath, or noticing sensations in your fingertips are prime examples of mind-body integration in action, teaching the brain to interpret bodily cues as information rather than noise. Over time, these small practices increase neuroplasticity in the networks that monitor body state and attention, which means your system becomes more efficient at noticing early stress signals and recalibrating before tension escalates. And what's remarkable is that these micro-practices also reinforce emotional resilience, because when the body is supported, the mind is less reactive, and the cycle of stress and fatigue slows down. It's a profound demonstration that integration isn't abstract. It's a skill we cultivate intentionally, with feedback from both our nervous system and our conscious attention. Exactly, and one of my favorite ways to put this into practice is with a short breath with movement mini demo that listeners can do right now, no equipment needed. Start by sitting comfortably or standing with feet hip-width apart. Take a slow inhale for 4 counts while subtly lifting your arms or rolling your shoulders. Pause for 1 count at the top. Then exhale for 6 counts while gently lowering your arms and letting tension release from the neck, shoulders, and jaw. Notice the sensations in your body, the expansion in your lungs, the subtle stretch across your chest, the pressure of your feet against the floor, and allow your attention to move along with your breath and motion. Even 30 seconds of this activates attention circuits, integrates bodily awareness, and engages the parasympathetic nervous system, which is why you often feel calmer and more centered almost immediately. And repeated a few times a day, these micro-practices actually strengthen neural pathways connecting mind and body, making awareness and balance increasingly automatic. What's powerful about this is that you can scale it: longer sessions, slower movements, or walking while coordinating breath and posture, and every variation strengthens the connection in slightly different ways. And beyond the physiological effects, these practices cultivate curiosity, presence, and a kind of gentle self-discipline that reinforces both emotional and cognitive regulation in daily life. In short, every mindful motion paired with breath is literally teaching your nervous system how to support you rather than work against you. Yes, and I'd also emphasize consistency over intensity, because the brain responds best to repeated, intentional experiences rather than occasional extremes. It's not about doing the perfect yoga flow or walking miles mindfully. It's about noticing, responding, and integrating consistently, even in small moments. For instance, taking a short mindful walk between meetings, pausing midday to check in with breath and posture, or performing a gentle stretch before bed can all activate the same mind-body circuits and improve regulation over time. The cumulative effect is profound. Better stress response, clearer thinking, improved emotional resilience, and even physical benefits like better sleep and reduced tension. And for listeners, the beauty of this approach is that it gives immediate feedback. Even 1 minute of breath-centered movement can shift heart rate, calm thoughts, and relax muscles, so you know it's working in real time. Over weeks, months, and years, these small acts compound, rewiring neural connectivity and creating a baseline of integration that carries into every aspect of life. It's empowering because it demonstrates that mind-body balance isn't a vague goal or a luxury. It's a skill accessible to everyone that can be practiced anytime, anywhere, and in ways that feel natural and sustainable. And I think that's what makes it so exciting. You don't need to wait for a perfect moment, studio, or class. Your own awareness and movement are enough to create tangible, science-backed results. Exactly, and as we wrap up this section, I want to encourage listeners to experiment with these practices in real life, starting with something small. Maybe just 5 deep breaths with gentle shoulder rolls or a 2-minute mindful walk around the block, and notice how your mind, body, and even emotions shift. Over time, these moments create neural integration, emotional resilience, and physiological regulation that compound in ways that are subtle but life-changing. And the best part is that these practices cultivate curiosity and presence, helping you build an ongoing dialogue with your body rather than ignoring its signals or forcing it to catch up with your mind. Tiny, consistent acts like these are where real change lives, and they give us the lived experience of the science we've been talking about throughout the episode. So, Noah, let's make this really concrete. If someone listening wants to take just one small step tomorrow to strengthen their mind-body balance, what would you suggest? I think the magic lies in the small, intentional habits that we can repeat consistently, because neuroscience shows that tiny, repeated actions gradually rewire neural pathways and shape physiological responses over time, creating lasting resilience rather than temporary relief. Something as simple as a 5-minute mindful stretch in the morning, not just going through the motions, but noticing the breath, the sensation of muscles lengthening, the subtle shifts in posture, can set the tone for the entire day, preparing both mind and body to handle stress more gracefully. Or a short walk outside, where the focus isn't on steps or calories but on coordinating breath with movement, noticing the feet connecting with the ground, the shoulders releasing, and even the rhythm of thoughts. This activates attention circuits, calms the nervous system, and reinforces mind-body integration. Even pausing midday to check in with posture, breath, and subtle body tension interrupts stress feedback loops, lowers cortisol, and improves focus for the rest of your tasks. And the beauty is that these moments are highly accessible. They don't require equipment, special training, or hours of your day. They simply require curiosity, attention, and intention. Over weeks, the accumulation of these micro-practices begins to change default patterns in the nervous system, creating a baseline of awareness and balance that carries forward even in stressful situations. And perhaps most importantly, they teach the mind to listen to the body and the body to communicate with the mind, turning everyday routines into opportunities for integration and resilience. Yes, absolutely. And what I love is that these small rituals give listeners a sense of agency because they don't need to wait for perfect conditions, a long class, or fancy tools. You can start anywhere, anytime, and see immediate feedback. For instance, even a single mindful pause before checking emails, placing your hand on your chest, feeling your heartbeat, taking 3 slow, conscious breaths, can subtly shift the nervous system from reactive to responsive, which is something neuroscience has repeatedly confirmed about interoception and parasympathetic activation. Another practice I recommend is observing your body while doing simple household or work tasks. Notice posture, breathing, and subtle tension while washing dishes, folding laundry, or walking to your car, turning even mundane moments into micro-habits that reinforce mind-body connection. The cumulative effect of these daily interruptions is powerful. Over time, attention networks and bodily awareness circuits strengthen, emotional regulation improves, and stress reactivity decreases. And I find it fascinating that these tiny acts don't just influence mental clarity or mood in the moment. They gradually shape how we approach challenges, interact with others, and even perceive our own energy levels throughout the day. It's a gentle but profound reminder that integration isn't about large, dramatic routines. It's about consistently noticing, responding, and aligning small behaviors with awareness. And for anyone who doubts it, I encourage experimenting with just one tiny habit this week, paying attention to subtle changes in energy, mood, and focus, because the effects are cumulative and often surprising. Exactly. And I'd also add that the flexibility of these micro-practices is what makes them sustainable. They can be adapted to any lifestyle or energy level. Maybe one person chooses a 2-minute mindful stretch in the morning, another takes a short walking break during lunch while focusing on breath, and someone else pauses before an important call or meeting to check in with their posture and tension. Each practice, while different in form, accomplishes the same goal. It strengthens the neural integration between mind and body and provides immediate feedback about your state, which helps you respond rather than react to stress. And what I love is that these practices cultivate presence and self-awareness, so we begin to notice tension, fatigue, or mental chatter earlier and can respond gently before it escalates. Over weeks, these small repeated actions create a foundation of balance, making it easier to handle bigger challenges without feeling depleted or disconnected. The science is clear. Repeated microhabits like these improve interoception, attention networks, and emotional regulation, which are all key for resilience. And the most exciting part is that anyone can start today. You don't need to wait for a perfect morning, a gym membership, or a guided class. The body and mind are ready to respond as soon as you bring awareness and intention. Exactly, and framing these habits as invitations rather than obligations is so important because it encourages curiosity and experimentation instead of perfectionism or self-criticism. Every mindful moment, a few conscious breaths, a subtle stretch, or a walking pause is like a mini lab for noticing how attention, body, and emotion interact, and over time, these small experiments create profound changes in default patterns of thinking, feeling, and moving. And the cumulative impact is extraordinary. Neural circuits involved in attention and body awareness strengthen, emotional reactivity decreases, and the body learns to communicate clearly with the mind, which enhances overall resilience, energy, and clarity. Tiny, repeated micro-practices are where real integration lives, and they are accessible to everyone, regardless of schedule, experience, or environment. And what's so inspiring is that these simple actions gradually transform not only our nervous system, but also our daily experience, making balance a lived, tangible reality instead of an abstract goal. Listeners can start with just one small ritual tomorrow, even something as simple as taking 5 conscious breaths before starting the day, and notice the ripple effect it has throughout the week. Over time, these practices snowball into a rhythm of awareness that permeates life in subtle but profound ways. And that's the real magic. Mind-body balance isn't a big, rare event. It's built one small, consistent, mindful habit at a time. Now, Elen, one of my favorite topics is how tiny interruptions throughout the day can actually make a huge difference in mind-body integration, because most of us spend hours running on autopilot, caught up in work, screens, or to-do lists, barely noticing how our bodies feel or what our minds are doing. Even a simple 30-second pause, closing your eyes, noticing your breath, feeling your feet against the floor, can reset the nervous system in ways that science confirms improve attention, reduce stress hormones, and increase emotional regulation. What's so interesting is that these micro-interruptions don't have to be dramatic. They're literally small, intentional nudges that remind the mind and body to reconnect, creating a feedback loop that over time strengthens neural pathways responsible for awareness and resilience. I like to think of it as sending little signals to your brain and body saying, "Hey, we're working together here," rather than letting one system dominate the other. And what's empowering is that these micro-moments are completely flexible. You can do them while standing in line, waiting for your coffee, during a Zoom call, or even while brushing your teeth. The key is intention and noticing subtle changes in tension, breath, or posture. Over days and weeks, these tiny practices accumulate like compound interest, improving focus, clarity, and energy in ways that often feel almost effortless once the habit is formed. And the beauty of this approach is that it's accessible to everyone. It doesn't require a class, special equipment, or a perfect schedule, just a willingness to notice, pause, and reconnect in real time. Exactly, Noah. And what's fascinating is how these micro-interruptions can also shift emotional states because the body and mind are so tightly linked. Even one intentional pause to notice your shoulders, soften your jaw, and take a few conscious breaths can lower sympathetic nervous system activity, decrease cortisol production, and subtly recalibrate emotional reactivity, which helps prevent the small stresses of the day from accumulating into fatigue or overwhelm. I like to encourage listeners to pick a few anchor moments, maybe before meals, after phone call, or mid-morning, where you intentionally check in with your body and breath, notice tension or discomfort, and consciously release it, even for just 60 seconds. These small, consistent breaks teach the brain that it's safe to slow down and integrate information from the body, creating a pattern of awareness that makes longer practices, like yoga or meditation, even more effective. And what's really exciting is that these micro-practices help you notice subtle early signals of stress, a tight jaw, shallow breathing, or rapid thoughts, so you can intervene before tension escalates, which is something research on interoception and nervous system regulation consistently supports. Over time, this builds a foundation of mind-body responsiveness, where your attention, emotions, and physical state are aligned in real time rather than constantly out of sync. And the small shifts you notice don't just improve your well-being in the moment. They create a ripple effect that influences productivity, decision-making, and overall mood across the day. It's a gentle, science-backed reminder that reconnection doesn't have to be grand or time-consuming. It can be as simple as a few intentional breaths paired with awareness and posture. Yes, and I love giving listeners practical examples they can start with immediately. For instance, when you feel yourself becoming tense during work, you might stand up, roll your shoulders, extend your spine, and take 3 deep breaths, paying attention to the physical sensations of release. Or if your mind feels scattered, placing a hand on your chest and one on your belly to notice the rhythm of your heartbeat and breath for a few moments can center both body and mind simultaneously. Even subtle gestures, like stretching your arms overhead while inhaling deeply and exhaling slowly, can reset posture, oxygenate the body, and signal the nervous system that it's time to recalibrate. These micro-interruptions are powerful because they're accessible anywhere: a short pause while waiting for an elevator, a mindful sip of coffee, or even observing your surroundings on a quick walk can all serve as tiny reminders that your mind and body are working together. And over time, repeating these small actions rewires neural pathways, strengthens attention and interoception networks, and creates a baseline of presence and resilience that supports everything from emotional regulation to physical health. It's amazing how something so brief and simple can have compounding benefits, showing listeners that integration doesn't need long routines or complicated practices. It's built into the choices we make throughout the day, moment by moment. Absolutely. And I also want to emphasize that micro-interruptions cultivate curiosity and self-awareness, which is key for making them stick. When you start noticing subtle signals in your body, a shallow breath, shoulder tension, or a racing mind, you're training your nervous system to be responsive instead of reactive, which is essentially creating a habit of mindful integration. And the best part is that this approach is forgiving. There's no right way to do it, no strict schedule or perfect posture required. Just noticing, pausing, and responding intentionally is enough to create measurable shifts over time. Over weeks and months, these repeated moments compound, not only improving physical and emotional well-being, but also helping the mind stay present, calm, and clear even in stressful situations. And perhaps what I find most inspiring is that micro-interruptions remind us that integration isn't a distant goal. It's available to us in every moment, in every breath, in every movement we choose to notice. By building a repertoire of small, flexible practices throughout the day, we create a safety net of awareness, a network of mini reset points that continually reconnect mind and body. And that's the true beauty of this approach. It's simple, accessible, science-backed, and immediately empowering, showing listeners that they always have a tool to bring balance into their lives, even in the busiest or most stressful moments. Exactly, Elen, and to summarize this segment, I'd say that micro-interruptions are the unsung heroes of mind-body integration because they allow us to continually check in, respond, and recalibrate without needing long, structured practice sessions. They teach the body and mind to communicate efficiently, reduce stress, and create a sense of control and presence that extends far beyond the moment itself. The key takeaway for listeners is this. Even a few seconds of mindful awareness, a short stretch, or a conscious breath repeated throughout the day can create compounding effects that improve clarity, focus, energy, and emotional balance. And the beauty is that it's accessible to everyone. You don't need special training, equipment, or hours of your day. The power lies in intention, awareness, and consistency. By turning ordinary moments into opportunities to reconnect, we gradually build a life where mind and body are no longer at odds, but are working together in harmony, every day, moment by moment. As we start to wrap up today, I just want to reflect on the big idea we've been exploring, that mind and body aren't two separate tracks we're trying to balance, but one continuous, lived experience that shapes everything, how we feel emotionally, how we think cognitively, and how we move through the world physically. And what's been so powerful for me in sharing this conversation with you and in my own daily practice is realizing that integration isn't a perfect state or a distant goal. It's a series of choices, of little attentions, of noticing and responding in the present moment to what your system is asking for. Right now, I'm focusing on taking even brief pauses throughout the day to check in with my breath and posture, and noticing how that ripple affects my energy, my patience, and my clarity, even in moments that normally feel hectic or stressful. It's incredible to witness how these small practices accumulate over time, changing not just my state of being in the moment, but my overall sense of resilience and alignment. And I hope that for listeners, this conversation feels less like a lecture and more like an invitation, an encouragement to experiment, observe, and explore the connection between mind and body in ways that feel meaningful for your own life. Yes, absolutely, Noah. And for me, one of the things I'm personally focusing on right now is really slowing down long enough to notice subtle cues from my body, the tension in my shoulders, the shallow breaths, the rhythms of my movements, and allowing those observations to inform how I approach the day, my work, and even my relationships. It's a daily experiment in awareness, but even when it feels small or simple, the impact is tangible. Mental clarity improves, emotional regulation strengthens, and a sense of groundedness begins to emerge that carries me through moments that used to feel overwhelming. And I love that this reinforces something we've said throughout the episode. Balance is less about achieving perfection and more about creating a conversation between mind and body, noticing, responding, and cultivating integration incrementally. So, for a practical takeaway, we'd love to invite anyone listening to try one mindful movement or breath practice every day this week, even for just a few minutes, and observe how it shifts your energy, focus, and emotional state over time. Notice what changes, however subtle, and allow that to guide your next steps toward alignment and resilience. And if you've enjoyed this conversation and want to continue exploring these ideas with us, consider subscribing to Coremates so you never miss an episode. We'll keep sharing insights, stories, and practices to help you strengthen the connection between mind and body in everyday life. Exactly. Small steps, intentional awareness, and curiosity are all you need to begin, and we're so grateful you joined us today to explore this together. Remember, every moment you take to breathe, move, or simply notice is a step toward integration, toward presence, and toward living a life where mind and body support each other instead of working at odds. And we hope that by tuning in, you'll feel encouraged to experiment with these small practices and notice the shifts they create. Because your own experience is the ultimate teacher.